Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rule Number 3, the podcast committed to an asshole-free workplace. I'm your host, Eric Harkins, author of Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck. And I'm excited to have the founder and operating partner of 5C Group with me today, Jim Copeland. Jim, we recently met. We share a very similar background. I want to start by saying thank you for joining us today. I know it's going to be a great conversation, and can't wait to continue the discussion we had a few days ago.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for having me, Eric. And it was a real blessing to meet you, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jim and I got introduced by a mutual connection. We figured out we did cross paths back in the day in our early days of our career, which we both started at Target Corporation. And let me tell everyone, for people that may not know who you are, a little bit about your background. It's really impressive. And that's what I want to focus on today, is kind of the lessons that you've learned throughout your career. You know, as I've talked about on the other podcasts, this is about bringing leaders in, and on the podcast who are as passionate as I am around workplace culture and leadership. And I know you share a lot of the same philosophies, and you've got some great lessons that you've learned that you're now putting to use in your own firm. So let's jump right into it. So your background, similar to me, although you spent a few more years there. You started your career at Target Corporation. You spent 14 years there. Really impressive. Your last role was a group managing director, where you were responsible for a little over $2 billion in revenue and just under 10,000 employees. So I want to come back to that. Then you went on to be the COO at another retailer, Century 21 stores. Then you continued your retail journey as a VP of sales or ops or both at Sears, Office Depot, and then most recently Garda World, before taking the jump off the deep end, which I'm excited about for you, starting your own firm, which is 5C Group, which really focuses, it's not a retail specific organization, although your background has a lot of retail in it. It's about operational efficiency, operational excellence. And I think from our conversation and from what I know about you, you know, you really are an expert at turnarounds, kind of transformational work, certainly high growth situations. So I'll give you the floor. Tell us a little bit about 5C Group and the inspiration to starting your own firm.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so I've been blessed to have an almost 30-year career working everything from a Fortune 50 company like Target to a family businesses. And, you know, one of the things that I was able to be a part of and I got to see was a pattern of how much it mattered to align operations with two really big tenets: the team experience, and the customer experience, and how difficult at times it can be to align all three of those with so many different competing priorities, so many different functional expertise and passions. Yeah. I really believe being able to align those, and in particular, the leader being able to align those, can really drive success in building profitable, sustainable businesses. Yeah. And I fortunately got to do that in these multiple companies, got to do it in multiple industries, including actually at Jackson Hewitt in the tax business, where I got to bring a lot of this together. Yeah. And I've just been blessed to see it, but clearly the combination of leadership, the right teams, the right operations, and the right customer experience will drive a really great company.
Yeah, and I apologize, I missed that one. A pretty big role. You were the COO of all of Jackson Hewitt, which is a really interesting business model, and you know, really focused on some operational excellence there. One of the things that came out of your journey that you're putting to use for your clients now is, you know, something that you call 1357. And I'd love to give you the opportunity to kind of talk about what that is, how you use it with your clients, and how you kind of, you know, created that over the years.
Yeah, it really is a pretty foundational checklist. And sometimes based on where the client is on their journey, it might be more overt, but sometimes it's more of a diagnostic checklist. But the 1357 is something that started with what I was inspired with at Target in the way they kept such a large organization focused. But then multiple leaders used some form of this in the other companies I was a part of, whatever they called it. But really, the 1357 is about focus, and generally, it's one mission, so one true North Star,
Yep.
three big objectives
Yeah.
that the company's going to go after, and generally, this will be one in the team area, one in the operations area, one in the customer area. But
Yep.
then the five is five core values that you're going to, as a company, as a leadership group, be really committed to ensuring, coaching, following up on these values and these behaviors.
Yeah.
And then the seven is the seven priorities that are going to happen for, let's say, this year.
Yep.
And I find in the 1357, when it's really well crafted with the involvement of the team,
Yeah.
and it's committed to, and you continue to go back to it, it creates an inertia of positive momentum and results over time that is
Yeah.
pretty unbeatable.
Yeah.
And so I use the 1357 model as a way of saying, hey, are we committed and focused to the right mission, the right objectives, the right behaviors or values?
Sure.
And then are we really focusing on seven priorities? And most companies would go, no, there's like 150.
Right.
Well, if you get yourself down to, seven of the biggest ones, what you tend to do is solve a lot of the other 150 priorities.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, throughout your career, I mean, you've been using it now and with your own firm, but how often do you find that companies don't have any of those? Probably rarely, or they have them, but is one of the issues that nobody really knows what they are, or they're just so outdated, or it's a combination of probably a lot of it. But what has your experience been? Is there one of those that's missing most, or one of those that's more important than the others, or do you need all? Can you have the one without the three, the five, and the seven, or do they have to go together?
Well, I think what happens most is I think most companies have some a semblance of what we're talking about. It's very foundational, right? But what you find is a lot of companies, they end up either getting left on the wall or they get left with the last leadership group.
Yeah.
And what happens is they end up getting watered down and not really what I would call lived.
Yeah.
And in one of the companies that I was so inspired by back at Office Depot, this Roland Smith had the task as a CEO of combining Office Depot and Office Max.
Yeah.
And Roland had a form of the 1357, and he built a house, and these were going to be the core values. This was going to be the mission. And what he stated was basically, look, 80% of all mergers don't deliver on the results and the synergies. And the comment was basically because you don't continue to focus on the roadmap that you set out to do, and it gets fragmented and splintered. So what I find, back to your question, is a lot of companies will kind of forget about it.
Sure.
It'll get watered down, and in the fragmentation, they'll start to do lots of things.
Yeah.
And so I think the key is to sit there and talk about it as a thing itself. Yeah. So the 1357 and be very clear in what it is, but also super important, especially the value behavior piece, to incorporate it into the review process.
Yeah.
And to incorporate it into what the leader's job is. So when you start to think about what is the leader going to do? Well, the number one job of the leader becomes they are going to model, follow up, and celebrate when they see people very focused on the 1357.
Yeah.
And they're going to take some of the other noise out.
Sure.
And so what I find is it does get left on the wall. It does get left in the last year because there's so many things going on. Yeah. But where you bring it together, you can have a lot of power. And it becomes pretty, what I call it, it's a very unsexy role. You go, okay, great. We got the 1357. Let's move on.
Right.
And I think great leaders continue to bring their teams back to, in a repetitive format, by the way. Yep. What's our mission? What's our objectives? What's our core values? What's our priorities? Yeah. And the best compliment I ever got as a leader was in multiple roles is, man, I remember the first day we talked, Jim, an employee, you're talking about the same exact thing 2 years later.
Right.
And I'm going, exactly.
Right.
So that's how
Well,
important it is.
yeah, and you're touching on a really, I think, critical part of, leadership in general. And, one of my questions for you is, so as from my book, I have my lead expectations, and one of them is support the direction of the company with no hidden agendas. And that is tough to do when you have a big organization, especially in a post-merger acquisition. Going back to your Target days, I mean, you had 10,000 employees across multiple states, over $2 billion in revenue, and dozens of people that were leaders, hundreds of people that were leaders. How do you know that your leadership team is aligned? How do you know that they're supporting the direction of the company? And what do you do when you find out they have a hidden objective, or they aren't aligned with it and you thought they might be? I'm sure you run across that quite a bit throughout your career.
Yeah, and without sounding repetitive, I really do believe it is about staying very true to kind of the roadmap or what we've laid out around the mission and the objectives and the core values. And I have a deep passion for this, Eric. Leaders' jobs are to constantly stay in that discussion, ask incredibly good questions. Back in our Target days, I went to a thing called the Coaching Institute.
Yeah.
And what blew me away, and I tell this story today, we spent 40 hours learning how to ask great questions.
Yeah.
We were taped, we were evaluated. And what was so powerful about that is it really taught me is, look, as the leader, you go and ask questions. And so the point being is, as you do that and you constantly are asking the questions, you get an understanding of who understands where we're going.
Yeah.
And are they aligned? And then people that don't, you get an opportunity to help them get realigned, understanding things get fragmented. But you also get a clear path too of where there might be lack of accountability, lack of splintering. Yeah. And again, I think the cost of this approach is very it's very unsexy. You have to stay on message. You don't get to, and I think this is why a lot of people don't do it. You don't get to keep recreating.
Right.
And I think our human spirits want to create. And what I found is, if you can stay on message with the direction or the critical path, where you can create is around the uniqueness of helping every single individual develop. Yeah. Because every individual is a fingerprint. They're unique. Right. So you can be creative in how do you help them get to a better spot through good questions, through encouragement, through helping them come up with the solutions. And you can also be creative in creating wow moments for the customer. Yeah. But a really good company, if they want, especially when you have that large of a group, if you want people to move, I think it's important to help people stay aligned around what matters most. And so again, the approach by constantly coming back to the theme, asking great questions, and then taking the answers and acting on those. And sometimes it's additional coaching. Sometimes it's really difficult conversations about, hey, somebody doesn't believe in what we're doing, or somebody doesn't understand what we're doing, or somebody has a different direction. And as a leader, you got to be courageous to address that, to keep moving forward. And those are really important moments.
And it's such a hard thing for so many leaders. And, I like to talk about the fact that, listen, nobody likes having tough conversations. I joke about it when I do my keynote. I think I said something about it in the book. You and I both had to fire a lot of people throughout our career. It's part of being a leader. And I always joke, hey, I never went home and high-fived my wife. Hey, I got to fire somebody today. But great leaders don't avoid it. And any thoughts on, how you've been able to help leaders who really struggle with that? Because it is probably, in my coaching, and I'm guessing in yours, one of the biggest areas of opportunity of every leader I've ever supported is having those tough conversations in a timely manner, not having those tough conversations after 6 months went by and now you're so frustrated it can't even be a productive conversation. Any thoughts or tips or tricks of, how you managed that? Because I think that is one of the big roadblocks for a lot of companies in progress.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I have a saying that I use is, it's important for leaders to have a clear conscience. Yeah. What I mean by that is, I help leaders go, hey, look, were you really clear with people with what you expected?
Yeah.
And it could be from the roadmap, but also what they expect as a leader. And I go, that's really important first, and that should come out in, of course, in a consistent way. I go, but once you're really clear about it,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier for us to acknowledge nobody likes having difficult conversations, especially if you're a good leader. You
Right.
want people to win.
Yeah.
And so then acknowledge that confronting people and having, hard conversations, the reality is most of us don't like it. But then the third part about that is realizing how important that is for that individual, but also for anybody else that they affect.
Yeah.
And the fact that they will see actually a benefit from that conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes the person will get better.
Right.
Sometimes the person will because you were honest with them, will be honest back. And so
Yeah.
the point being, I read a thing a long time ago. It's about teaching people to eat the frog. And one of the things that happens, Eric, by the way, is
Yeah.
in young management careers, we don't share enough how this is such an important tool in the tool belt for
Yeah.
managing performance, difficult conversations. And so one of the things you're doing is you're doing a lot of rehab with leaders, meaning some leaders have never had the difficult conversation. Some
Yeah.
leaders have never let somebody go. And
Right.
so what I have found is one of the roles I have is, okay, you haven't. It is difficult.
Right.
It's good to have a clear conscience. So let's talk about expectation, but
Yeah.
then let's practice doing it with a difficult case.
Yeah.
And once these leaders do have those difficult conversations, even one,
Yeah.
they gain confidence.
Right.
And then they can be more direct going forward. And it's very freeing, very powerful, not
Yeah.
only for them, but for the individual and for the
Yep.
organization.
Yeah. And, I tend to be, somewhat black and white on this topic from a standpoint of I agree with everything you said. And if you have that leader that still isn't willing to do it, still allows that poor performer to show up, at some point they need to decide if they can get there through coaching and help, or it might be time to, decide that, a leadership role might not be for them. And that's okay too. It doesn't mean they can't
Absolutely.
still add value in the organization in a different role. So.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I talked a lot about what I shared, obviously, was a lot of the prep up to that, because once they do that, then I think my conclusion is it's
Yeah.
really easy to see somebody that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So once you get there, then it's just about be honest. They got to go.
Right. Yep. And, that's part of being a leader. So on that note,
Yeah.
one of the questions I like to ask all my guests, and, we could spend the rest of our time talking about this because I realize it's a very big question, but, it's 2023 and we're still talking, and you and I every day still hear stories about bad leaders. We still hear stories. We work with companies that are allowing bad leaders to lead people. Will there ever be a day where we're not able to have a whole podcast committed to bad leadership? I don't know. What are your thoughts? It's been a conversation for our entire career, and I imagine it'll be a conversation for our kids' careers. But love your thoughts on it.
I have a couple really, really deep convicting thoughts. First was, look, if I ran the world, there would be a leadership degree in college that would be up there with relevance, like a finance degree, a marketing degree, a business administration degree. Now, I know there are leadership degrees out there,
Sure,
but it still hasn't taken its place in that leadership as a competency matters. And so this leads to my answer, a long-winded answer. But so first of all, I don't think leadership as a competency is still well understood and still valued, or it's not valued where it should be. And the reasons for that, I think there's a lot, but I do kind of cutting through. I do think it's because managing people and leading people is abstract and it's hard. And it's not as concrete. And us as humans, we like concrete. We do not like gray. And so I think people tend to avoid it. At the end of the day, I also think it's one of the most, as you do, and I loved your book, by the way.
Thank you.
Rule number 3 is foundational. The rule itself too. But I would say is I think it'll always be there because I think it is the toughest work you can do, or the most noble work, but the most important work you can do in running a business. Is really figuring out the leadership factor. It's
Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
it's dismissed, it's abstract,
Right.
but it's also the thing that, if done right, can 10x your business. And somebody
Yeah.
can go, oh, 10x, it can.
Yeah.
I've done it as an operator. And clearly, you and I had the fortune to grow up with a company that was trying to become world class and became world class. But as
Yeah.
an operator,
Yeah.
there's no way you can't start with the people. And I have
Yeah.
a saying that says, people first, process second. Now, I'm
Yeah.
an operator. And so back to your thing, no, I think till the end of time, until businesses are done
Yeah.
running,
Yeah.
leadership's going to be a topic. And I frankly think, even though it's not as clear for every business to start with the leadership and
Yeah.
the team piece, I think that's where our opportunity lies
Yeah.
as helpers, as supporters, as consultants, as
Yeah.
business people.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to have you on. You know, we just met fairly recently, had, you know, an awesome conversation around this whole topic. And I agree with you. And I think we share this philosophy that, you know, your biggest differentiator that you have as a company right now, I'm a big believer, your only differentiator is who you allow to be a leader. And, you know, one of the things that you talked to me about, and it's out on your LinkedIn profile, is, you know, in one of your roles, you kind of went worst to first. You took the most underperforming region and, you know, created the top performing region for the organization. In that time, you had over 50 leaders who were promoted to other opportunities for the organization. What I didn't ask you before that I want to ask you today, I'm also going to guess you had 50 leaders who were promoted. I don't know how many leaders you had that you realized, you know, weren't going to be the right ones to take us from worst to first. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about, you know, during that journey. I don't know if you remember, hey, yeah, we promoted 50, but we changed out half our leadership team. I don't know what it was, but I bet it was a fairly big number in that journey.
It really was. Look, and you can't talk about the development and the growth of people without talking about the performance of people.
Yeah.
And I'll get to this example in particular, but every role I've taken over, and we've been talking about this all the time. Look, you set a really clear path, and you do it with the team. Where are we going to go?
Yeah.
Where are we going to go to build profitable sales? Because businesses are about building profitable sales.
Yeah.
Where are we going to go? And then what you do is you start with the human capital, you start with the team. And in doing that, after you've laid down the values we're going to behave by, the focus we're going to have, the critical path we're going to go down, well, then you start to lead that way. You start to support that way. You start to focus people, and you get real.
Yeah.
And in those behaviors, things like, you know, my core values and 5 C's, called 5C for this reason. There's 5 core values, but attitude, accountability, teamwork, proactivity, and excellence. Well, you start to judge people by that. And pretty quickly, this is where I have a very clear conscience, pretty quickly, some people don't want to have the right attitude.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to be accountable. Yeah. What happens is they have to exit over time. But here's the more important thing that happens. You start to ask people that really believe in that, people that want to do more. Sometimes these people were never asked. I had store managers that were excellent in their jobs that I would ask, and this is in that exact example with the 50 leaders that got promoted. I would ask them, what do you want to do? Do you want to do more?
Right.
And sometimes they would go, I never knew I could. My boss told me I couldn't. And that's just that boss, it's poor leadership.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of those situations, frankly, these people would take over for bad bosses, Eric.
Yeah.
So this all happened in dynamic where I would promote people and then we would performance manage people. But I really created a situation where great leadership over inspired and pushed out poor leadership.
Yeah.
It wasn't Jim did this, Jim did that. No, Jim just opened up the potential of an organization through really high bar. You know, we're going to build profitable sales through people.
Right.
And this magic happened.
Yeah.
And in that, you have to deal with poor performers. And but it changes. I'm just going to say one last thing.
Yeah.
This was a company that told me when I got there, we had nobody who was promotable to a multi-unit level.
Yeah.
Within 6 months, we had 14 people. You go, Jim, did you find 14 new people? No.
Yeah.
We changed the discussion. And then, by the way, within a year, we were attracting talent outside the organization. Why?
Yeah.
Because of this thing called back channel and friends
Yeah.
and reputation. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, people wanted to work and be a part of
Right.
this because you know what they heard?
Right.
Wow, you can grow
Such a
there,
good, right. I
and
mean,
they became a part of it, so it becomes magnetic.
yeah. We could talk for another hour on just what you said just now, because I couldn't agree with it more. One of my favorite sayings, which is kind of embedded in what you said about your journey of going from worst to first, is, the best way to reduce turnover is to fire more people. I love to say that because it also gets kind of a weird look from people who are like, what? But it's kind of what you talk about. You got to figure out who wants to be there. Then you got to find what they're really capable of. Then you got to unleash their potential. And you have to be okay as a leader to say this isn't going to be for everyone. Or even if that person who wants to be part of it, but they just don't have the ability you're looking for, you got to have that, tough conversation too. But really what you're talking about and what you do at 5C that I think I probably do with lead, which is sort of my foundation, is there's an expectation. And that's really what you're talking about. There is for me, it's here's the 8 questions to ask of your leaders. For you, it's the 5 C's or the 1, 3, 5, 7. Is that consistent? Does everyone in the organization know what you expect? But more importantly, do your actions match? Here's the expectation. But if we find a leader that doesn't live this, they don't get to be a leader here. Or if we have a leader who's not following 1, 3, 5, 7 because they like 2, 4, 6, 8 better and they're doing it, behind your back, well, they don't get to be a leader here either. And I always talk about the fact, and I'd love you to comment on this, if you asked people who worked with me, if I was a good boss, I think the high performers would say, yeah, I liked working with Eric. I'd work for him again. If you asked people who were poor performers if they liked working for me, they'd probably say, no, I didn't like him that much. And I don't think that's arrogance. I think that's leadership, that you just have to be okay. Because if you focus on creating a culture for high performers, nothing else really matters, right? The people who quit but never gave you their notice, those poor performers, they show up every day, but they quit you a long time ago. You shouldn't care too much about what they think. I don't know if you have a thought on that.
I do. I think you're right on it. And I would even go as far as to say this. If it's your lead model, which I love, Eric, or the 1, 3, 5, 7, none of this is mine at least. It's not breakthrough.
No, neither's mine.
But,
right.
but here's what I would say is, and you asked the question earlier about do companies live it? Here's my call out to a company. If you don't have something explicit that points out the true North Star, the behaviors you expect, the things you're going to focus on, invariably there's another story that's already going on, meaning it will be replaced by a different set of rules that aren't as explicit. And that's things like, as long as you know the right people here, you get to stay. Right. As long as you deliver that one number, you can stay, irrelevant of how you behave and treat people. Yeah. And so I think where my passion comes in on why you need lead or you need some type of framework is without that, you will create a bad culture. Yeah. Because human nature is to survive and to protect the current state. Yeah. And so you might as well put something in that is what I would call inspiring, ambitious. People can grow, people can thrive in it. You might as well, because if you don't, something's going to be there. Right. So that, I don't know if that response is helpful, but
no, it's great. And I think we've both had experience with that kind of post-acquisition merger, and that can be really challenging. One of the things you shared with me at Jackson Hewitt, you had hundreds of locations without any of that consistency across. And you can talk about McDonald's, you can talk about any company that's scaled on a big level, Target Corporation while we were there, Walmart, hundreds of companies that have scaled and grown. Because if you're in New York, Florida, Wisconsin, or Texas, it's the same experience. And that shouldn't just be for the customer buying a hamburger. That should be for your team, that I know that this company takes leadership seriously, or that this is what the 1 is, this is what the 3 is, this is what the 5 and the 7 are across all 1,000 locations that we have. And there's just, you can't you can't put the value on that, but you can't have it without that consistency either, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I don't know if it's a side note, but it's super important as part of this is that I think what's gotten me so convicted of this over the years, Eric, is when I've taken over suboptimal situations, sometimes that weren't maybe bad. They just weren't as good as they could be.
Yeah.
What's inspired me about this is comments that come from people a year later saying, hey, I don't know what we've done or what you did, but gosh, am I happy you're here? And I want to give more of me.
Yeah.
That's the thing that makes me go, boy, we're optimizing, we're getting there. And it really is the thing that, at this point, I love building businesses and growing profitability.
Yeah.
But the thing that kind of is very grounding and very anchoring is when somebody goes, hey, we got a place here where I can thrive.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things you had to do in all of those experiences, whether you articulated it along the way, is, making sure you're not letting those poor performers show up. And, I have my set of rules, 1, 2, 3, and, rule number 2, poor performing employees don't quit voluntarily. But the people that appreciate that, as you've just said, are those high performers. High performers want to work with high performers. And I, can't stress enough, and I know that you talk about this in your coaching, you're never going to create a culture high performers want to be a part of if they have to work with underperformers. So
right on.
I appreciate the work that you're doing with your, clients around that. And, I always love to find, one-liners that I've heard people say, or they post something. And, one of them for you is, hey, when all is said and done, more is said than done. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, as creatures and as learners and in a knowledge society, what I have found is, boy, a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of people talk about it.
Yeah.
A lot of people want, one of the biggest things is every company I've ever met understands people are first.
Yeah.
What's interesting is there's a huge difference between that's what we all want and then doing the hard work that really makes that come alive.
Right.
And I would argue foundational work you've even done, and I know it's very real world, but I would argue the hard work starts at how you're really going to cultivate the right leadership expectation, get rid of poor leaders, the team experience, and then you move into the operations and the customer experience. But it's that doing and making it come alive that I think is the hard part about this.
Right.
Everybody can put out a great plan. Right. Everybody can talk about the things. People are going to walk away from this video and go, wow, they sounded great. That was inspiring. Well, the truth is when we get into it, it's, hey, we got to do this every week for the rest of our life to run a great business. That's hard work.
Yeah.
So I love to take it from all that is said and start to get it all done.
Right. Well, a couple thoughts on that. I mean, one, I think your brand, your reputation from Target and all the other organizations that you've been in is, and to use my words, you're not an asshole. And I know that you've fired dozens of people. You've had hundreds of very hard conversations. You've had to make very difficult decisions. I'm sure you've closed stores and closed businesses along the way and had to stand up in front of people that had been there 30 years and tell them today's their last day. And my point to that, and one of the things that I respect so much about you, and when I meet other leaders like you, how do we help people understand you can do all those hard things and you don't have to be an asshole? You don't have to be an asshole when you fire someone, right?
Nope.
How do we help people? I think that's one of the challenges. People think they need to be somebody different than just a very respectful, hey, this isn't going to work out. Shake your hand, walk out with you. It doesn't have to be a screaming, contentious, ugly situation. And I'd love any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I think even, when I read your book, Eric, and what I would just say is, I think what you're getting at, I don't want to sound cliche, you can be real and human. I think one of the things that to this day, when I have to have a hard conversation and people can believe it or not, I don't sleep well the night before.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's gotten, but because partly what I do is I empathize going, gosh, I won't want to be on the other side of that. So what it does is it really balances me and anchors me in.
Yeah.
How do you do it? But I do think it's super worthy, because I think at the heart of leadership is loving people,
Yeah.
and also um, being firm and holding them accountable to behaviors and expectations.
Yeah.
And I do think, back to your point, you can do it by
Yeah.
being real.
Yeah.
And back to your book, I would say is your book talks about be real, but you're also just a real guy and you're fun. You talk about some of the funny,
Yeah.
situations that happen.
Right.
Um, and then you talk about some of the, asinine situations that happen. But
Right.
but I think if any leader just says, look, I'm
Yeah.
just going to be a real person.
Yeah.
What I think that does is it actually takes away, you being an asshole if you decide to change. But
Yeah.
I also think it makes it really effective,
Yeah.
because people really they really do respect real people, even the people that don't like you and I,
Yeah.
because we've had to have the tough conversations. We've had to let them go over time. I
Right.
do believe they look back and go, you know what? Jim was fair. He was
Yeah.
consistent.
Yep.
He had a clear conscience in what he was trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as we start to maybe wind down a great conversation, the time always goes fast, but I have a question for you that I've asked a few others who've been on. So I have a daughter who graduated from college a little over a year ago. She's at that fun early, first couple of years of her career. And then I have a son who's in college, and he'll be graduating within the next couple of years and starting his career. If they called you and said, hey, Jim, 30 years of experience, you've been in so many different environments. Any advice for me as I start my career? What would you tell somebody who, whether they're graduating from college or not, going into a trade, graduating high school, but starting their career? What words of wisdom would you give somebody?
Well, it's very relevant in that I have 5 children, but
Yeah.
4 of them are just coming out of college. 2 just got out. One's graduating next week. One's
Yeah.
graduating next year. And I think about this a lot, as I think of them. And I think I
Yeah.
give them, not even think, they would tell you, I
Yeah.
give them 2 really clear pieces of advice. And the first one is really build a practice of knowing yourself.
Hmm.
And I think any great leader, Eric, it's very foundational. Any great leader knows themselves, and that includes know what you're not good at,
Yeah.
and frankly, know your darker tendencies. And
Hmm.
so, any great leader, I say, hey, look, what's your superpower?
Yeah.
And start to understand your superpower and anchor in that superpower over life. And then, what's your kryptonite?
Sure.
And I think self-awareness creates incredible leaders, especially if they do it through a lifetime. Today,
Yeah.
I know what I'm good at, Eric, but I'm a lot more in tune to
Hmm.
I'm sometimes too verbose,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm too critical. And
Yeah.
so know yourself really well.
It's
I
great.
think the second one is an extension of that. But here's the other thing I tell my kids: dance your dance.
Hmm.
And the first thing they want to say to me is, what should that dance be?
Yeah.
And what I say is, after 30 years, and I wish somebody told me this when I was 20, after 30 years, I found out your dance is your unique fingerprint.
Hmm.
You're going to get lots of advice. But what you got to do is you got to dance your dance. And it's so unique.
Yeah.
And it has elements of some of the principles you and I talk about.
Yeah.
But everybody, if they're self-aware and they dance their dance,
Yeah.
they will have a humongous impact, not only on their own small tribe and world, themselves and their world, but
Yeah.
they will have an outsized impact on the world.
Hmm.
But boy, is it hard to dance your dance, because
Yeah.
you have to own your dance. You have to own your decisions. You
Yeah.
have to make mistakes.
Right.
And you can't really turn to somebody else and go, but I'm just dancing like you. Well, you're not them.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I hope that's helpful.
Oh, I love it. Dance your dance. I can't think of a better way to maybe close out the conversation. I do want to give you an opportunity, though, to give your contact information. So a quick plug for Jim and 5C. And it's the number 5 and the letter C. So 5C
Yep.
Group when you're looking
Yep.
for you. What's the best way for people to reach out? And email or a phone number, and we'll tag
just
you in
email.
our post as well.
Right.
So
For right now, I'm building out my business, but right now, go to Jim Copeland. Look me up on LinkedIn. Right there, my contact information's there.
perfect.
And what I would say is, look, I'm really humble. I've had a blessed almost 30-year career,
Yeah.
but I truly want to help businesses align and optimize their teams, their operations, and their customers to grow profitable sales.
Yeah.
And I truly believe you can be awesome with people and build huge profitability.
Yeah.
It just takes a very purposeful approach.
Yeah.
But I think it's very congruent. And I think great companies have great leaders that are great with people that really focus on consistency and results. And so that's what I love to do.
Awesome.
I also can teach a lot around the mistakes I made.
Yeah.
So the mistakes and the learnings I've had are probably my best lessons that I can be helpful around.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, and just a plug from from me, and we have, hundreds of the same people that we know, and I can tell everybody, if you want somebody who, again, has been doing this for 30 years, knows how to help you improve your operations, can see the things that he saw that it took 30 years to see, and help you address them before you run into that roadblock, I encourage you to reach out to Jim, and right back at you. I mean, if nothing else, you're just a genuine and authentic leader who does care about helping companies, get better. And that's your main motivator. And that's why you're so successful. So 5C Group, Jim Copeland, thanks for joining us today. And for everyone who tuned in, thanks for listening to another episode of Rule Number 3, the podcast committed to an asshole-free workplace.
Love it. Thank you, Eric. Really enjoyed
Thanks,
it.
Jim.